Ros, over to you.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you, everybody. It's wonderful to see so many people here. Welcome, all of you, to the third of our series, Sustainability and Beyond. I'm the chair of RCE London, and this is part of our series, which is celebrating 10 years of the work of RCE London as part of the global network of regional centres on education for sustainability. RCE London is hosted by London South Bank University, and we have networks across Europe and the whole of the world, in fact, whole of the globe. So if you're interested in working in sustainability, whether it's on the environment or social side, or both indeed, please do check out the UNESCO website and look up RCE, and you'll find out where the nearest RCE to you is. And there are certainly some in the Americas, there's certainly Canada, and there's certainly the States. I'm not sure about Miami. I don't think Miami is included as yet. So Osman, that may be an opportunity for you to set one up over there, who knows. But thank you all for joining us, and I'd like to now hand over to Neil Herrington, who is a member of RCE London on the management group, and who has organised this interesting event, and will take you forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ros, for that very kind introduction. I'm very pleased and heartened at the number of people that have chosen to join us today, and we're going to be talking about biodiversity in this series of seminars which are entitled Sustainability and Beyond, as part of the 10th anniversary of London RCE actually gaining recognition from the United Nations University. The RCEs are networks, and the RCE network is a network of networks. So the idea is that we build networks locally, and then those networks interact with networks elsewhere to sort of build critical mass on these things. And when we were thinking about the work that we'd done and the work that we would like to do in the future and the networks that we would like to build, biodiversity was something which we identified as needing to give a little bit of attention to in terms of the networks and the work that we as an RCE in London had done. And I see personally tonight as being a bit of a kickoff on that, and moving ourselves forward. And at the end, there will be Q&A, and I would ask people to, by all means, use the chat to put those questions to people. We've also got a Twitter hashtag this evening, which is hashtag RCE Bionet, BIONET, biodiversity and network. You probably can see what I've done there. So if you want to post a question on Twitter, that's the hashtag for that. If you want to put something into the chat, by all means do that as we're going along. Just bear in mind that I'm sort of going to be collating those questions, and I don't want to miss anything. So, maybe we're not going to handle any questions until right at the end anyway. So maybe hold those questions until the end, but do feel free to sort of interact with through the chat during the course of the evening. The evening's going to go a little bit like this, unless you're in Miami, in which case it's sort of early morning, I suppose, but sort of that's by the by. I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction to this evening's seminar, linking it as best I can with a few reflections on the seminars that have gone prior to this in the series. Some of you will have been along to those, some might not have done so. They're not necessarily reflections on the seminars themselves, but reflections on the areas that were discussed. Then I'm going to introduce the participants, the contributors, for this evening. We've got three contributors, Kieran Brown, Dr. Paula Vandergeert, and Dr. Caroline Nash, who will talk about work that they've done in the area of biodiversity and planning and such like. And once those are done, we're going to ask them to speak for about 15 minutes each. When all three have spoken, we'll go into some Q&A, and tease out some of the main themes of the presentations, looking particularly, and this is a steer that I gave to them all, at lessons that they've learnt from the projects that they've been involved in, with the idea that people in other networks and in other parts of the world can take those ideas and maybe utilize them in their own context. Okay, so that's how the evening is going to proceed. Like I said, starting off with a little bit of a reflection that I've had on one of the first seminars, or the first seminar, which was given, and that was about art and sort of art and biodiversity and sustainability, and the way in which art represents nature and wildlife and so on. And in that seminar, Hugh talked about Rousseau depicting an imagined nature, and Whistler treating nature as a raw material for art, maybe most obviously embodied in the work of Goldsworthy and Christo. So I sort of followed a little bit of this up and sort of and found this comment by Laura Cumming, which was published in The Guardian in 2019 in response to an exhibition of Whistler. And she said that actually Whistler famously despised nature's rampant chaos, and said things like, nature is very rarely right, to such an extent even that it might almost be said that nature is usually wrong. And that sort of started me thinking about, you know, well, if art is a manifestation of culture, then maybe the representation of nature in art and the way in which some artists think about this might not necessarily be the most positive way of looking at nature. And I sort of, and quite serendipitously, I came across this book by Jay Griffiths, which is published by Penguin. It's a Penguin special. It's sort of it's a little bit of a polemic, if truth be told. But in it, Griffiths talks about the Futurist Manifesto, and actually the way in which the Futurist Manifesto led to what is described in her book as the solar flares of fascism, and talked about the Futurist Manifesto, which was written by Marinetti, and foresaw and was intoxicated by the idea of a war between organic nature and mechanized humanity. And sort of that led me to think, well, actually, this is a nice link. Well, nice is probably not the right word, but this is a link between art and the storytelling that Griffiths does in this book. And when I opened the book, I was taken by the first paragraph, which basically says, "I wish that everybody who said they believed in angels would actually believe in insects, who tactfully and quietly remove the dead. Without them, we would be wading through corpses at every step." Now, there's lots that one could unpack in that particular statement, because it's not just insects, obviously, but you know, it's a nice hook in terms of that, and that hook leads to some discussion of, you know, where were you when the music stopped and everything ceased, talking about lockdown and the pandemic. And says this: we stopped doing everything except the very thing that had caused the virus in the first place. Again, some discussion about that, which was annihilating the living world. But then talks about, although humans are just 0.01% of all life, we have destroyed 83% of wild animals, and we have done so without awareness. And that sort of led me to think about another form of storytelling, sort of in a song, okay? And those of us of a certain generation will not need me to tell you who wrote this. You know, don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? Joni Mitchell, 1970, Big Yellow Taxi. All right, a sort of a little bit of an anthem in terms of environmental awareness. All right, and I put this in for two reasons. Firstly, because I think it's a very useful thing to think about, but also, you know, we have a generation who seem to think that all baby boomers are evil and have never thought about these things. But in 1970, you know, these things were on an agenda, and that's quite an important point, right? These things were on an agenda in 1970, and we are now where we are, and it doesn't seem that that agenda really took us in the right sort of direction. So don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? Or my hypothesis for my thinking around this evening is this: if you don't know what you've got, then it's gone. Okay, and actually we are quite, going back to what Griffiths said in the book, you know, we have limited awareness of what is actually there, and it's very difficult to take care of something if we don't know what it is that we're taking care of. Hence the pre-seminar task, you know, where I asked about naming 5 organisms that you could immediately think of when I said British wildlife. Okay, and thanks very much for those people who engaged with that and put the 5 things in there. I'm not going to embarrass anybody by putting those lists up, but just to have a little bit of a think about how easy or difficult was it to think about 5 things which could be said to be British wildlife. And looking through the list, I get the impression that there are certain groups which are privileged over others. And there are certain groups which aren't even thought about in terms of wildlife, you know, and these are massive assertions that I'm making, but comes from a piece of research that I did with some students of mine. And what I neglected to say at the start is I used to train biology teachers, right? You would think, would you not, that if you were a biology teacher, you would know about the names of organisms, animals, and such like. I can tell you that lots of people who have trained as biology teachers don't necessarily know that. That's not because you know, that they're a subset of the population. Things are not easily are not always known about. So, for example, it was very telling that once a colleague of mine asked students to write about a forest, or a British woodland food web, and somebody put that they thought that there might be a cod in the water in the forest. Okay, extreme example, but not massively surprising. The fact is that nature exists in its own right, whether we paint it or write about it or sing about it, but we do need to have some way of picturing it. And a way of picturing it is to actually go out and see it and count it and monitor it. And we have examples of those sorts of projects, like the one that's coming up in the UK on Saturday and Sunday of this week, the Great Garden Birdwatch that the RSPB and the BTO, the British Trust for Ornithology, organise. So there are plenty of ways in which we can begin to engage with nature and wildlife in their real context. And real versus virtual engagement, I think, is quite an important thing to grasp as well, because it's almost a mantra nowadays that well-being and nature connectedness are interlinked. But it's also, and somebody has done some work on this, that actually, if you see images of nature on screens, the sort of the endorphins and the well-being is very similar to if you are actually out in nature. Right now, I worry about things like that, because it's, if we just look at what the the issue is from a human perspective in terms of their well-being, rather than the perspective of nature and the organisms which live outside of the human sphere, then we're sort of diminishing things, right? And that is seen in reports like the State of Nature report and so on. But I will finish on this, and I'm not going to go through this, but I asked you for 5. Okay, 5 things which could be seen to be British wildlife. Depends a little bit on definition, but there's around about 70,000 multicellular organisms in the UK and UK coastal waters now. Lots of those things wouldn't be seen as being wildlife in the sense that that many people would think about it. But naming 5 when there's 70,000 to choose from just says that maybe our awareness is not as great as it could be. Now, I'm going to stop at that point. I sort of realised I've rambled on a little bit, and sort of hand over to somebody, Kieran Brown, who has done quite a lot of work on this area of raising awareness of those organisms which are maybe less well known. Right, so Kieran developed an interest in invertebrates through a field-based entomology module at university, and became, from that, a volunteer on soil biodiversity research projects at the Natural History Museum in London. He now manages the BioLinks project for the Field Studies Council, as well as teaching on a number of their courses, such as Discovering iRecord, which is a mechanism for putting up records of nature and wildlife sightings. He also chairs the Ecology and Entomology section of the London Natural History Society. He's going to be talking, as you can see from the screen, all being well, about taking field studies online. So I'll hand over to Kieran at this point.
Thank you, Neil. Something that you said in that I thought was really interesting. If you don't know what you've got, it's gone. And there's a common misconception within the wider public that even though that they don't know something, the scientists must. And that's really what my project is all about. It's filling in some of those gaps that nobody knows, because we simply don't have enough data. So I'll just give a little bit of a background. My organisation is a Field Studies Council. It's not particularly well known in London, although we do have a number of sites in London that we operate at. We're mainly an environmental education charity dealing with children. We also publish a lot of identification guides. So if you've ever seen the fold-out guides that you get at garden centres, nature reserves, they're probably by the Field Studies Council. The part of the organisation that I work in, though, is where we educate adults rather than children. And I did work within a team that was called the Biodiversity team, and they've run a number of externally funded projects funded by government and grant providers that have all been about recording wildlife and training people to identify British wildlife. And they've all culminated in the BioLinks project, which I developed and manage. And that was a 5-year project starting at the end of 2017. And the main part of it was to train up new invertebrate recorders in the West Midlands and the South East. So we had 2 training programs. Our focus is on invertebrates, specifically these groups. So invertebrates are insects and other things like mollusks, so slugs and snails, earthworms, spiders, etc. So these are all the groups that we chose were under-recorded and data deficient, as well as being difficult to identify. So you do need a little bit of training for this. And the idea was that we would train up lots of people who would then use their newfound skills to go out and record wildlife. So it would contribute real data, but they do it as part of a fun activity. And the UK's natural history, amateur naturalist community is already quite big, but we need more people doing invertebrates. So first 2 years of the project, really successful. We had loads of achievements. I'm not going to go through them all. So the 2 programs were really starting to hit their stride. and we had another 3 years to go. So to give you an example of what we do for beetles, this is an example of the training courses that we'd offer. So we had everything right through from an introductory level through to an advanced level. And the idea was that people at different levels could come in wherever was suitable for them and work their way through the training opportunities that we provided. That, unfortunately, never happened because coronavirus hit. And when coronavirus hit, I had to start cancelling courses. And as you can see from these, there's the different types of events we had. This is just the Southeast training program in 2020. Most of it was cancelled. And that is replicated again in the West Midlands. So we then had a choice. We could either pause the project and mothball it until coronavirus went away, or we could pivot and try and find a way of engaging with people and providing some forms of training via virtual means. Now, we knew we couldn't do a lot of what we were doing because a lot of it was microscope based and it involved being there with the students, teaching them, looking at specimens, but we wanted to figure out a way that we could still engage with the participants virtually. So online learning, there are a few perceived barriers to online learning. So the first of all, accessibility. Not everybody is able to access a computer. And I can almost guarantee that even everybody on this call had much poorer digital skills at the beginning of the pandemic than they do now. We're all Zoom experts now. I even had to learn how to use Microsoft Teams, which isn't always a pleasant experience. So yeah, and access to the internet, etc. A lot more people, I think, are probably online than they were before because they've had to. It's become a necessity. Another barrier is cost. Setting up new systems costs money. Zoom accounts cost money. A Zoom account where you want over 100 people on it means that you need a pro account. If you want 500 people on it, you've got to add a large meeting add-on, and all these things cost money. And a lot of these costs are not one-off costs, they're ongoing costs, and you have to commit to a year's subscription of X, Y, and Z if you want to do that. So that's also something to consider. Attention span. So it can be difficult to maintain the attention of learners online. We would have people coming on our 3-day residential courses. There's no point in trying to get people on a 3-day online course. They're going to lose interest. They're just not going to maintain the same level of attention. So you may have to adapt the length of the activities that you're delivering. And then finally, then outdoor learning. So with environmental education, the Field Studies Council feels that it's all about getting people outdoors and learning about nature by experiencing it. So exactly what Neil was saying, we want to make sure that we're engaging people with real wildlife rather than things like nature documentaries, because then they see what they've got on their doorstep and they care about their local environment. And then finally, another barrier would be tools. So in addition to the costs of setting up new systems, it can be difficult to get access to those new tools. You might need to build a new system. And as well as that, people need training on using tools. So although we may all be quite competent with Zoom now, I'm sure we've all got lots of horror stories from when we were first using these new systems that we weren't used to. So those are the barriers, but there are also some perceived benefits to online learning. So again, accessibility, there are barriers, but online learning opens up our training programs beyond our regional or local barriers. It also opens it up to people that have mobility issues and people that maybe have hearing issues that can have their device set up so that they can hear where they might struggle in a classroom. So increased accessibility, reach. So off the back of that, that reach for our training went from being local or regional, depending on what we were offering, to being national and even beyond. I mean, we've got people from, I saw people from Canada, from Nigeria, from Florida in the States, all on this call today, which they weren't going to pop over for a 1.5 hour conference prior to using online methods, were they? Capacity. If you're going to do a talk in a church hall, then you've got a limited capacity. A lot of our training opportunities were limited even further because they were classroom talks. So an online classroom, you can have a lot more people. Another thing that is both a barrier and a benefit, I think, is costs. So we talked about those costs of setting up new systems. Once you've actually set up those systems, usually the costs of delivering activities online are a lot lower than delivering activities at a venue. I don't have to provide you all with tea or coffee, for example, which these things add up. You also, when you're paying trainers, you're paying them for a shorter period of time because you're not paying them for travel, and you're not paying their travel, etc. as well. And then finally, I think something that we should always be thinking about when we're delivering training for environmental purposes is the environmental impact of that training. And the environmental impact of a online course is surely lower because everybody's not traveling to and from it. So yeah, so environmental benefits as well. So we had two main aims when it came to the online training that we wanted to do and that we agreed with our funders. And that was to engage people with invertebrates and recording. We knew we couldn't do the same level of ID, but we also wanted to provide people with, so we wanted to engage people with it, and we also wanted to provide some level of ID and recording training as well. So we wanted to bring new people in, and those people that were in, we wanted to develop their skills further. So we did exactly what you're doing today. We did a load of Zoom webinars. We tried to make them interactive. We ran a series of 30 initially, and then as COVID went on and on and on, we expanded that. We got a load of really great feedback. People, we weren't originally trying to tackle the issue of people that couldn't access our sites. We were trying to think of something that could act as a substitute for the people we were already engaged with, but the feedback told us that we were getting our stuff out to new people, to people that had previously felt excluded, and that was a really, really nice side effect and a great thing for us to report back to our funders and my organisation as well. One of the highlights, so after the initial talks, we also decided to ramp things up a bit. We did some invertebrate conservation skills webinars to develop sector professionals. So rather than just engaging with new people, we developed skills within the sector. And then we went on at the latest series of virtual talks is our Natural History Lives. And I think we've got about 7 or 8 of them left to run before the project finishes. Our next one is seahorses, 20 years of research. So we did go a little bit beyond invertebrates with the virtual talk. Unfortunately, you can't book on that now. Fully booked with 1,000 people booked on it. There's a waiting list that you can add to, you can put yourself, but we do have more. A to Z of bee flies is a highlight that I've picked out. Bee flies are fantastic little organisms that look really cute, but they're actually quite deadly to bees, not to us. And you can book on these events via our Eventbrite page on by the FSC Eventbrite page, and I can share the links after the talk in the chat. So what did we achieve with these? We did 76 virtual talks have been delivered as of the end of last year. That's over 9,000 live participants, and we've got, at the end of 2021, we had over 25,000 views on those videos, because we can make that a lasting resource afterwards. What did we learn? So Neil wanted me to give you some lessons learned. So this is my rundown of what we learned with delivering Zoom-based webinars. First of all, don't be a hero. It's not a one-person job. Don't try and make it a one-person job. The more people that you've got involved helping behind the scenes, the better and the smoother the experience, the more interactive you can be with the participants. Practice makes perfect. Even if you are an expert when it comes to Zoom, your speakers may not be. So ensure that your speakers have an opportunity to practice run and trial anything new that you're going to do. So if you're going to use a Padlet, as we're using today, make sure you've got that set up well in advance and you've tried and tested it. The more, the jerkier. I'm not sure how true this is now, but when we first started, as our audience grew, it became more difficult to run a smooth session because the internet couldn't hold up. I think internet providers have improved, and I think Zoom has improved, but we had to learn when we got past a certain point that we needed to tell our participants to turn off their videos, for example. So it's just having mitigation in place for when the audience gets bigger. You're the expert. Doesn't matter whether you like it or not. If you're hosting a Zoom session, all of your participants expect you to be able to answer their tech questions, and they will send you their tech questions. So you need to be able to troubleshoot, and you need to make sure that you understand how the platform works and what the common problems might be. And finally, listen and learn. So gather feedback, review it. That enables your sessions to improve with time. Our sessions now are a well-oiled machine compared to our first ever session. So in addition to the virtual talks, we also wanted to, so the engagement side of it, we also wanted to develop more recording and ID skills. So what we did was we created, I can't even spell correctly, I see that, online training courses, not online. That's not something new and exciting. It just should say online training courses. So in order to do this, we invested in an online training platform using a system called Moodle, and we developed online training courses. Now, we wanted these to be more than click-through PowerPoints or just live webinars. So we have they're made up of modules, usually 4 or 2 modules, and each module is delivered throughout the course of a week. So each weekly module will contain 1 live webinar with a subject expert. It would include study content to work through, which includes workbooks that have videos, written content, images, diagrams, etc. It would have automatically graded activities, so things like quizzes on it. And it would have, I think really importantly, and what sets us aside is tutor graded assignments. So we thought it was really important to get people outside. So we would give them field assignments and they would submit a piece of work based on that. So it might be a map of their local park, it might be images, and that would be graded by the expert that is doing the live webinars. We started off with Discovering iRecord, which is a course that's all about teaching people about how to make their wildlife observations count by submitting them through this free platform. And we learned a lot of lessons doing that as well, which I'll come to in a second. And that's now on its 5th run, with its 6th run due to occur later in the year with butterfly conservation, where we'll have a bit more of a focus on butterflies and moths. So it's been really successful, and it's opened up biological recording to a load of new people, or people that were struggling with the iRecord platform. We also tried to stick to our training programs, our structured training programs, bringing people through. So with bees, for example, we've got our Discovering Bees course. Then we've got that's a 4-week course. Then we've got a 2-week course on bee nesting, ecology and conservation, and then a 4-week course on field identification of bumblebees. So we're taking people through that journey. We're also looking at beetles, earthworms, and coming very soon, spiders. It's in the final stages of review with an expert at the moment. So, and I just got told today, this is stop press, slugs and snails will be coming soon too. And you can book all of our courses online. I'm going to do a shameless plug because this is the last year of the project and they're currently all available. The 4-week ones for £20 and the 2-week ones for £10. And that is limited while the project is running. After the project's finished, they'll go to be the full price of £60 and £30. So if you're interested in this, I recommend booking now. So what did we achieve with the online training courses? So far, we've delivered 11. We've had over 1,352 people booked on them. And I think it's important to say that as well as being a significant new engagement channel for the Field Studies Council, this has also created a significant new income generation channel as well. And when COVID hit, my organisation took a big hit. No schools were coming to our sites, and the £180 contribution that my organisation had to make to my project as part of the funding agreement was no longer available. So this enabled us to offset that, which was fantastic because it meant we didn't have to close the project. So what lessons do we learn? Teach, don't preach. It's really important that online training is interactive, just like it should be in a classroom. So just as in a classroom, you don't want death by PowerPoint, you want something interactive. It should be the same online, and finding innovative ways of doing that is really, really important. And that might be as simple as putting Zoom polls in a presentation, etc. Spread it out, number 2. When we first tried, we put too much in a week and people really struggled to keep up. The beauty of online learning is that people can do it at their own speed and they can do it in different sections, and you should utilise that. Number 3, get them outside. In online learning is always associated with being sat at a computer. It doesn't have to be. You're using digital tools to help deliver and engage with your learners, but that doesn't mean they have to do everything at the computer. We're really passionate about getting them outside. So Discovering iRecord, the assignment that my participants were doing today, last week, was to do a mini garden birdwatch, and that's cleverly timed to get them ready to then do it for real outside of the course next week as well. So yeah, no need for people to be inside. It's important to get them out there, engage them in nature. We all learn differently. That's really important. Online learning can use lots of different learning styles, and that's just good teaching practice. So what we'll quite often do is present a concept in the form of written text. We'll have it in a diagram, we'll have it in the video, and we'll test it in an activity. So we use lots of different learning teaching methods to cater for lots of different learning styles. And then finally on this, signpost like a boss. Another beauty of online learning is that you can interrupt the learning loads, where you can't do that in the classroom. You can give people a list of further reading, etc., but they can't pause their learning, go in and go off if they want to. They can do that with online learning. So make sure that you link to lots of resources and further learning opportunities. So for example, we quite often signpost or as additional learning some of the virtual talks that we've done. Yeah, like I said, all of those courses are available on the FSC website. And if people are interested in being notified about our training opportunities as they come up, whether that's online or our in-person training programs, which have restarted, then I recommend signing up to our FSC Biodiversity newsletter. That's where we announce everything first and give exclusive discounts on those and our publications as well. And that, Neil, is me. Hopefully I didn't go over too long.
No, you're absolutely fine. It's really interesting. I must say that I can highly recommend the work that the FSC does in terms of the online programs that I've been able to join in. I did one of the BioLinks courses about, which is where I met Kieran in the first place, on earthworms, and wholeheartedly recommend those activities for those people who are interested, and largely UK based. But it'd be quite interesting to hear from people from different parts of the world, and I know there are people on this call who aren't UK based, about the types of organisations that exist where they are to network these sorts of people and develop the interests of people. So thanks very much for that. There have been a couple of questions that have come through, which we'll park till the end, and I shall introduce our second contributor now. Thank you very much, Kieran. It's much appreciated. Second contributor tonight is Dr. Paula van der Geert. Paula is the director of the social enterprise Empath. She has led action research projects internationally, exploring what it takes to embed environmental and social justice in practice. Paula has worked with a range of environment, developmental and human rights NGOs, and regularly publishes in academic and non-academic publications. This evening, she will discuss the action research work that she led in Barking, exploring ways to meaningfully engage people with local native nature spaces. Thank you very much, Paula. Hand you over to you.
Thank you, Neil. Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm going to just give you a bit of a summary of work that I've done in East London mainly, but we'll then talk about how that has evolved into some other work. So hold on, I'm having trouble advancing my screen. This happened to somebody else earlier. There we go. So this talk is based on my work at the University of East London Sustainability Research Institute. I was there for 10 years until September 2021, and also on work that we've been developing in a spin-off social enterprise that was established in January 2021, which is Empath, which is the hat I've got on today. So the talk is going to encompass work done on 3 different projects, 2 of which were funded by the European Union and 1 by NHS England and London Borough of Barking and Dagenham. So we're talking about biodiversity this evening and why engage local people. I think Neil and Kieran have already indicated that it's very important to include people in trying to tell the biodiversity story. And as we need to more and more explore and explain how biodiversity is central to our efforts to challenge and address a number of environmental challenges. Part of that is also getting people to recognize that, and it's that knowledge and spreading the knowledge, exactly as Neil said at the beginning. But communicating about biodiversity is an additional skill for many practitioners. So this is why, as a social scientist, I've been very interested in the kind of the nature and people sort of dynamic for most of my working career. And meaningful community engagement in nature at a local level delivers local and global impacts. So locally, it can create opportunities to engage communities in an inclusive way, which I think leads to more lasting and sustainable involvement. And it enables conversations about biodiversity through a variety of activities, whether it be at fairs, talking about bee products or local products, whatever it may be. And then in terms of the global context within our current European project, Connecting Nature, we promote co-production and co-creation of nature-based solutions as invaluable tools to achieve sort of multiple lasting benefits at local and global levels. So obviously within this network, the SDGs are a very significant guiding force, and community involvement is really important for delivering those. A little less known is the Habitat 3 New Urban Agenda, which really focuses on rights and social justice and the commons. And I think there's a really interesting space for nature and people within that. And within Connecting Nature, colleagues have been involved in an EU task force that's researched and developed an evaluation framework to capture the impact of nature-based solutions across a range of challenges. And half of those really relate to people, to communities, to social justice, health and well-being, participatory planning and governance. So, you know, I would say that biodiversity and thinking about governance, social justice, health and well-being, etc., are really interlinked. Most of the work I want to share with you is based on our work in Thames Ward in the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham. Thames Ward, for those of you who don't know, is situated in East London in the London Borough of Barking. It's one of the poorer boroughs in London, and because it's on the edge of London, there's quite a bit of space for development. So it's site for one of the largest development areas in London, where 10,800 homes and a new community are under construction, and we're about halfway through the construction period in a new neighbourhood called Barking Riverside. And as you might gather from the name, this is next to the river, so it's next to the River Thames. And it's really within a wider context of post-industrial land, plus a 1950s estate of social housing. It's a fairly complex governance structure for the area. So although the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham sort of is the local borough within which this sits, the land that the new development is taking place on belongs to the Greater London Authority, the regional government, and they have embarked on a joint venture with a housing association to develop this site. And I would say the context really within this area is one of, quite divided communities in terms of the old estate, the people who are coming into the new area, the various social issues that have been experienced in the borough. And the Sustainability Research Institute at UEL has worked in the area for well over a decade across a range of different disciplines. I'm a social scientist, focused a lot on adaptive governance, community engagement. And this is an image from the new development at Barking Riverside. And as you can see from this, ecology and the environment is really central to the development, particularly in the phase 1 development, where because it's located next to the river, managing water has been a very central and a critical part of the design of the neighbourhood. There are also solar panels on the roof, roofs of the homes that you can see. There are little patches of green roofs. So it became a bit of an area that was very important for people, to urban designers, to come and see this new sustainable development. This is the kind of wider context within which it is taking place. And here is a glimpse of the 1950s social housing estate. So you can see that it's not all as glamorous as the new development around and about there. I started working there as part of a former European project, TURAS, which is transitioning towards urban resilience and sustainability. And our partners, local partners in that project, were the borough and the developer, Barking Riverside Limited. And within our team, we were involved in various aspects: the green infrastructure, adaptive governance, and local development work packages. So initially, a lot of the work was around the urban design and promoting that as good practice. I was particularly interested in the community side. So I started to look for opportunities to go and talk to local residents, where there were various social summer activities taking place. I would go and have a little stall, and it became clear that the residents had no idea about why this development looked the way it did, what the function was of the rain gardens or any of the ecological features. So I started to just tell people about this and provide information, developing relationships with local groups, with local residents who were particularly interested. The local scouts group would go out and do pond dipping activities. The schools were very interested. And I started to organise activities to bring in colleagues, including Caroline, who you'll be hearing from next as an ecologist, to really start to share some of the information and learning. So this is Caroline on top of the green roof of the community centre there. And again, people had no idea there was a green roof up there. And this is her explaining to the residents about the green roof and also the various other features of the site. And then when TURAS came to an end in 2016, I'd established over a few years relationships with quite a few groups, and was very sad at the thought that I was no longer funded to work with these people and had to turn my attention elsewhere. But I maintained my links and was fortunate enough to become part of the Healthy New Towns programme in Barking, Thames Ward, which was, there were 10 new towns that were funded by the NHS England to explore various aspects of urban neighbourhoods and how sustainability, health, well-being could all be linked. And because Barking was in a river location, they particularly wanted to look at blue spaces. So I did an 18-month action research, what I like to call slow research project on blue spaces. And this included the team doing a literature review because, as Neil alluded, although there's a lot of data and research now around green spaces and health and well-being, there's far less around blue spaces, or there was at that time. So it was very useful to get a sense of that. And then we went out and mapped the blue, green and community assets across not just Barking Riverside new development, but across the older 1950s estate and the wider area, and put together a map that really was one of the first times to share with people the whole neighbourhood, because we were finding that people didn't from the old neighbourhood did not visit the new neighbourhood and vice versa, even though there was literally just a road between them, and there was a lot of mistrust and bad feeling about the other community. So we wanted to visually represent that this is all one area. We wanted to visually represent where the interesting nature features were, blue assets, green assets, as well as the various local parks, etc. And we held local community events. We joined other community events. We worked in partnerships with the various groups there, Living Streets, Sustrans, local residents groups, to really over this time just go out, arrange walks, talk to people, share information, also with the developer as well. And it became clear that people, even didn't know very basic stuff, that a lot of them didn't know that they lived next to the Thames. Accessibility was an issue. So we would arrange walks to show people how to walk to the river. We would arrange walks to show people the various nature spots. So it was very, a very basic level of trying to raise awareness with people about the, the richness and the potential richness of the nature in that area. And then one of the things we decided to do at the end was to devise an ecology course, which was of a very limited nature, nothing like the scope that Kieran was talking about in terms of the base level and what we were doing. But it was spread over 3 days, and it was a range of different people coming together, again, sharing the map, talking about what was there. We organised community walks, and including with the local infant school. The short ecology course involved some classroom work, some visiting the local nature spots, and going on a field trip to Walthamstow Wetlands. And again, this was, although Walthamstow Wetlands is not too far from Barking, it was a really big deal for people to leave that neighbourhood and go somewhere on the train for a day. And because we had some young people with us who in situations where they're struggling with education and work, etc., we felt it was really important to recognise their commitment to coming to these 3 events to help with the younger children, etc. So we gave them certificates of attendance at the end. And I think what I learned from my work in Thames Ward over those 10 years really was that the more activities you can do, the more diverse and the more regularly over a period of time, and I like to call that slow action research, it's very valuable for building two-way relationships and knowledge, so that you understand where people are starting from, rather than having preconceived ideas about what they need to know. That working in partnership with other organisations really does create longer term value beyond the sum of the parts, but you have to be able to overcome the local rivalries, the local rivalry for funding pots, for projects, etc. There's scope to all work together. And if you start with where people are, both spatially and knowledge-wise, then you really start to make meaningful connections between people and their local places. And I think it's really important to listen, learn and adapt, rather than just be in delivery mode for projects. So then I just want to very briefly reflect on some learning from some not so good practice in East London. So this was revitalising underused open space in East London. So an opportunity had been identified for the revitalisation of an unused park in the social housing area by creating a community food growing space, and external funding was raised beds and a polytunnel were installed. Local councillors loved it. It was a great opportunity for photos and a piece in the local paper. 2 years later, this was the polytunnel. This was one of the raised beds, not used, falling into disrepair. And the missteps really here were that, on reflection, outsiders had identified a problem and came up with a solution. Residents were not asked whether they wanted food growing in the park. There was no assessment of local institutional capacity, no attempt to involve local people in the design or delivery, no consideration of ongoing sustainability of the project. So it's really, I like to think it's a case study of how not to do things, actually. So all of this work, really the work in UEL and collaboration with Trinity College Dublin and European cities through Connecting Nature led to the formation of Empath early last year. And it's a social enterprise that uses a range of people-centred co-production and engagement techniques in a variety of settings, primarily to support sustainable community development and environmental projects. We work across Europe, and the aim really is to help groups and organisations develop sustainable and inclusive projects, design outputs, conflict resolution and team building. And so we're developing an innovative, grounded, mixed methodologies approach that combines our expertise. So we're a team with expertise in anthropology, architecture and urban design, public health policy, humanist psychology, sustainable resource management, adaptive governance, arts and environmental justice. And we've developed something that we call the Sarajevo pathway that we piloted first in the city of Sarajevo and then did further work in Nicosia and A Coruña during 2019 and into 2020, where we were able to. And it's a co-creative arts-based engagement process that draws on memories, places us in nature, captures embodied experiences to help tell stories with and in nature. So again, I was interested to hear that you've already had themes around arts and storytelling, and we've really developed this to do that. And it's really, for us, we feel that this process is very powerful when capturing past, the present, and using that as the context for imagining the future. So it's a way of asking questions about what has brought you here in terms of relationship with nature. Where is here? So exploring a little bit around nature and what does here mean, which is where we do a little bit of sort of centering and feeling nature, and then use that to start to think about what's the goal, what are the visions, where do you want to get to? So it involves some memory work, it involves some immersion in nature and embodied reflection, it involves a little bit of ecotherapy practice and body mapping. So as I said, we did this in Sarajevo and Nicosia initially. In Sarajevo, the city team, so this is working across different agencies, took us out into the mountains just outside the city, where we were able to experience nature, take some time to really think about where we were, experience the sounds and the things that you don't get from photographs actually, which is the sounds of nature, the smells of nature, the feel of nature. And then we came back to the office and did some body mapping, which was where we just channeled our feelings and captured them in various ways on these drawings. And we all did that, so the people, us as the facilitators, as well as the participants, we all go through the same process. And it was really very powerful, actually. And in Nicosia, slightly different, it was adapted again. Again, it was a team of people across various organisations working on a specific project within the city. And this was an opportunity to take them to that place where they wanted to develop a project, to immerse them in nature, and while there to do their body maps. And then when they came back to the office, to then start to think more creatively about how they can approach the area that they want to have an impact in and develop a project for. And I think it's a really, what we've been finding is that actually it's a very powerful process because it builds trust and it helps people to get on the same page, whether they're experts or locals. So we were going to different countries, talking with people and doing this process with people who, English is not their first language, or they could all speak English. And because we were going through the process with them in real time, all the same, it was very powerful, actually, and helped to break down barriers. And we see it as a way to prepare the ground for collaborative work going forward. So for us, we were working with teams within cities who then would be going out to work with communities. They want to use this process to do that. And it's a way just to get people to tell the stories of nature that are important to them. And that's it. That's all I wanted to share with you today. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. Extremely interesting work that you've have been involved in and continue to be involved in, and sort of different, slightly different take on things from Kieran's in terms of working with the communities and coming from it from a social science point of view. A couple of questions that have come through for you, which we'll again pick up shortly, but I will, aware of time, hand over to Caroline now, Dr. Caroline Nash, who turned her fascination with wildlife into a career as an ecologist. Much of her work subsequently is focused on urban wildlife, exploring ways to support biodiversity in diverse urban settings, connecting people with nature. Caroline's doctoral research developed a design approach which draws inspiration from ecologically attuned urban green infrastructure. Caroline is a research fellow at the University of East London and co-director of a startup called Connecting Ecology, which provides clients with the support and tools required for effective biodiversity conservation through nature-based solutions. Her title that she's going to be talking today about that, supporting nature in cities with biodiverse nature-based solutions. Over to you, Caroline.
Thanks, Neil. Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. It's great to be here tonight and have this opportunity to share with you some of my research and the projects I've been working on, looking at supporting biodiversity in cities and nature-based solutions. Thanks, Neil, for inviting me to come along and talk tonight. And it was great to hear Paula and Kieran's fascinating work too. I've worked with Paula for quite a few years, and I've actually been on a couple of Kieran's courses. So yeah, it was good to hear about their stuff. Okay, so as Neil said, my background is in ecology, and I currently work as a research fellow at the University of East London in their Sustainability Research Institute. The SRI is a team of researchers working on a broad range of projects related to sustainability and delivering the Sustainable Development Goals. And I joined GBL in 2012 to do a PhD, which I'm going to talk a bit about today. And prior to that, I worked as an ecological consultant in London for many years, mostly carrying out bat and bird surveys and trying to make developments better for biodiversity. And so I'm sure everyone here knows that biodiversity is declining at unprecedented levels. And Neil's already said, The UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, which, you know, I still find that quite shocking and sad, really. And it's clearly really urgent that we find ways to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. And we need to do this in cities as well as in the wider landscape, what we think of as the countryside. And that's because globally now the urban population the global population is more urban than rural. And certainly in the UK, most of us now live in towns or cities. And we really need nature around us in towns and cities for our well-being and to make the places where we live and work healthy and resilient. And most importantly, of course, for nature's intrinsic value. And who wouldn't want to be surrounded by this? People tend to think of cities as being sort of natureless, devoid of biodiversity. But these pictures are of nature near me, where I live in the Badlands of deepest, darkest East London. And Paul has already mentioned about Walthamstow Wetlands. That's literally around the corner from me. And this is just to highlight that we've got some really great habitats and some really charismatic and also some rare species living with us in cities. And this is just to show that we don't just need to help biodiversity to keep people like me happy. We depend on it, and it's because it provides what we call ecosystem services. So all these benefits that are shown on this wheel here. And you can see that biodiversity underpins many of these ecosystem services. And it's crucial for us so that we can have a healthy and functioning planet. So a lot of my research at UEL has been investigating approaches to greening cities so that they can support biodiversity, as well as bringing benefits to people and helping with sustainable urban development. And I'm going to discuss some of my PhD research, and then I'm going to try and find time also to talk a little bit about some nature-based solutions projects that I've been working on. And I've used this term nature-based solutions, and I'm not sure if everybody will be familiar with it. The ideology behind nature-based solutions is to try and manage biodiversity loss and societal and environmental challenges like climate change with actions that involve nature and natural or modified habitats and ecosystems. And the aim is that with well-designed nature-based solutions, it should be possible to work with nature and enhance biodiversity whilst delivering multiple benefits. And as this image shows, it's a way of providing an alternative to grey infrastructure solutions that so often just provide a single function. And ultimately, nature-based solutions is about trying to change our old patterns so that we work with nature rather than against it. And working with nature was really at the heart of my PhD research. I've been looking at nature-based solution designs that are locally attuned, and this is to ensure that they provide key habitat features and resources to support biodiversity. And a key part of this was trying to develop a model or technique to guide this process, and we came up with this concept of the Eco-Mimicry Approach. The term eco-mimicry has been used by lots of different people to describe an approach that goes beyond biomimicry, which is a term that people might be a bit more familiar with. Unlike biomimicry, eco-mimicry doesn't only just take inspiration from nature, it also works with nature and with people to produce sustainable innovations. And for my research and the work that we've been doing at UEL, we use the term eco-mimicry to describe an approach to designing and creating nature-based solutions that take inspiration from locally typical, regionally important habitats. And we aim to embed the important features and functions of those habitats into green space design. And this is to ensure that nature-based solutions not only deliver ecosystem services such as like recreational spaces or stormwater management or urban cooling, but they also provide locally appropriate ecologically functioning habitat for biodiversity. And this slide shows a model that we developed as part of my PhD research as a guidance tool for the eco-mimicry process. And it starts with what essentially is reading the natural landscape. So looking at locally valuable habitats and species and things like natural signatures, local biodiversity action plans, features like geology, aspects and soils, because these are all crucial to how habitats develop and how they function for biodiversity. And then once these important and characteristic features have been identified, the next step is to explore creative and sustainable ways to embed these into nature-based solutions design. So before I show you some of those projects, eco-mimicry projects, I just wanted to quickly mention a really important habitat that's been a big part of my work. It's open mosaic habitat, which is a habitat that lots of people aren't that familiar with. It's a really biodiverse habitat in cities. It's a novel ecosystem that spontaneously develops on previously developed land that's been abandoned, and what we would more typically call brownfield sites. Because these sites are largely unmanaged, biodiversity flourishes, and sites with open mosaic habitat have become an important refuge in cities for many species of high conservation value. And what makes it so valuable for biodiversity ultimately is complexity in structure. This slide shows some of the key features and functions that open mosaic habitat provides. And it's the mosaic of varied microhabitats that develop on these sites that provide a diversity of niches. And these can support a really broad range of species. And in the context of cities, and certainly in London and the Southeast, this novel habitat is extremely important for biodiversity, and especially for invertebrates. And it's been a key habitat template for many of the eco-mimicry nature-based solutions projects that I've studied because of its high biodiversity value. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of this eco-mimicry approach. So first up is this really fabulous green roof in London's Olympic Park. It's a really great example of eco-mimicry. And as you can see in this image, at certain times of year, it's a really beautifully flower-rich habitat. In case people aren't familiar with green roofs, these vegetated systems that are installed on the roofs of buildings. And in dense cities, it's a really valuable way of getting habitat into the built environment. And this is a biosolar roof, which means it's a green roof combined with solar panels. It's quite a new technology. And it was designed to mimic aspects of open mosaic habitat, because before the Olympics, that site was a brownfield site with some really nice habitats on it. So it's a habitat resource and a renewable energy resource. And this just shows you some of the eco-mimicry features that they put into the design of this green roof. So the roof was built with bands of varied substrates with different nutrient levels. And then they added things like dead wood piles, rubble mounds, little habitat features. And these help to create a habitat mosaic and provide that really important structural diversity and complexity that biodiversity needs. And you can hopefully see in this image how these features were all creating variation in the plant growth and providing sort of varied microhabitats and lots of different refuges for wildlife. And during my PhD, and actually for several years since then, we've been monitoring this roof as part of the Olympic Park's Biodiversity Action Plan. And the results have been really positive. It's a really flower-rich habitat with lots of valuable native wildflowers. And we've recorded good numbers of rare and scarce invertebrates on the roof, including lots of the target species that they identified in the Olympic Park Biodiversity Action Plan. And also some fabulous birds. There's a bird at the bottom of the screen that's black with a red tail, and that's called a black redstart. And that's actually a really rare bird in the UK. And it seems to now be becoming quite strongly associated with these well-designed flower-rich green roof habitats. And our monitoring's shown that this roof design is great for biodiversity, but it's also fulfilling multiple functions. So it's helping to store stormwater, and it's providing a renewable energy source, and it's providing an important habitat for wildlife. And it's been a really good project for demonstrating that a biodiversity-led eco-mimicry design approach doesn't need to be a barrier to delivering multifunctionality. And this is another project I worked on during my PhD. It's an innovative landscaping scheme that was put on a big housing development in East London called Barking Riverside, which Paula mentioned. A target with this landscaping was to blend key ecological features with more traditional urban landscaping techniques, so that you provide important habitat niches along with visual amenity. And hopefully you can see the landscaping includes some novel aspects. So the top left image shows a section that had features like rubble and metal sheeting, and these were to provide niches for ground beetles and basking reptiles. And the top right image shows a south-facing sandbank pocket, and this was a really valuable habitat niche. It supported a really wide range of ground nesting bees and wasps, and it attracted lots of really rare species. And the bottom pocket includes novel niches like standing deadwood and log piles, and these were to support specialist and rare invertebrates that rely on deadwood habitats, species like stag beetles. And these were blended with the more formal kind of ornamental flower beds and mown turf, and that was to give it a bit more of a sort of familiar and managed aesthetic. And you can see that through eco-mimicry, this landscaping has that important structure and complexity that biodiversity needs. And compared to some of the standard landscaping in the Barking Riverside development, our monitoring revealed this technique worked really well for conserving target biodiversity. We had lots of key species recorded on this landscaping, including conservation priority species and target species like lesser stag beetles and the rare brown-banded carder. And in general, we recorded much higher pollinator diversity using the novel landscaping, including this lovely creature shown in the photo, the very hairy-legged pantaloon bee. And again, this type of landscaping can deliver similar multifunctional benefits to standard landscaping techniques, and potentially has a lower carbon footprint because it has lower maintenance demands. And eco-mimicry can be included in the design of grey as well as green infrastructure. So at UEL, we've been working with a landscaping innovator called John Little of the Grass Roof Company, who's been finding myriad ways to incorporate important habitat features into usually sterile grey infrastructure like bicycle shelters, signage and bin sheds. And through an EU-funded project called ARENA that UEL is a partner on, the SRI have been working with a range of nature-based enterprises, including green roof shelters, monitoring their products to help generate an evidence base to demonstrate the added value of these approaches, and also to help the companies with marketing material to help these innovations become more mainstream. And building an evidence base has been a really big part of the work that I've been doing on another European project called Connecting Nature. Connecting Nature is about developing mechanisms to scale up and scale out high quality nature-based solutions so that they move away from being isolated examples of innovation and good practice, like some of the projects that I've just shown, to become a mainstream and large scale approach to creating sustainable and livable cities. Connecting Nature has a strong recognition that community engagement during all stages of nature-based solutions is key to their success, and Paula's talks already kind of covered quite a lot of this. It's given us great insight into the value of getting communities involved in nature-based solutions development so they can understand the multiple benefits and feel empowered to share in its design, planning and stewardship. A key part of the project has been to devise and test approaches using multidisciplinary methods and co-creation processes. The Connecting Nature framework shown at the bottom here was developed to help cities consider all the important elements of large-scale implementation of nature-based solutions. And through co-production and peer-to-peer learning, the project's developed and trialled a range of processes, tools and guidance documents to overcome some of the challenges around transitioning to this nature-based solutions approach to city making. And I'd encourage anybody interested in this work to visit the Connecting Nature website, which has got lots of resources, and also our sister website, OPLA, which is a repository and marketplace for nature-based solutions projects. Much of the work that I've been doing on Connecting Nature, along with my colleague Stuart Connop at UEL, has been developing a set of indicators and methodologies to assess the impact of nature-based solutions and to create a robust evidence base on the multifunctional benefits. And this is to help unlock some of the barriers to wider rollout of nature-based solutions. The evaluation guidebook includes a range of approaches from very technical remote sensing techniques through to citizen science data gathering, similar to that covered by Kieran in his talk. And with our ecology backgrounds, Stu and I have been specifically looking at evaluation and technical guidance related to biodiversity benefits and locally contextualised design. And part of the Connecting Nature project is to support the development of new nature-based enterprises, which has led us to set up a spin-off enterprise called Connecting Ecology. And this is still in its very early days, but from our experience of working on nature-based solutions projects, designing for biodiversity and monitoring and evaluation, Stu and I will be developing a consultancy that can provide support and tools to help deliver biodiversity benefits across a range of projects. Our first job, we've already got a job, which is quite good, is working as part of an EU task force team to generate a mini guidebook on biodiversity metrics and evaluating nature-based solutions projects. And finally, I wanted to say, you know, much of what I've been talking about has been targeted at urban planning and development, but we can all take inspiration from these ideas and bring them into our own living spaces. And lots of small actions add up to a bigger cumulative positive impact. And in my own small city garden, I added a well-designed bee hotel and some wildlife-friendly plants. And I was amazed how quickly nature responded. During the first summer, I added a bee box and it was immediately occupied. And last year I introduced this fluffy plant at the bottom called lamb's ear. And within a few days, it was being fleeced by these wool carder bees to take off the hairs to build their nests. So just these two small additions to my garden meant I was providing these extra functions for biodiversity, for pollinators in particular, which are in trouble. And for me, it was absolutely fascinating to watch their comings and goings and learn more about their life cycle. So that's into my talk. Thank you for listening. I hope it's given you some insight into the value of embedding nature into cities.
It has indeed, Caroline. I'm sort of immensely grateful for the work that you've put in to presenting your work to us. That's absolutely great. Now, I am a major learning point from this evening is never ask me to chair anything because it will overrun horribly. I'm very aware of time. What I have asked for some questions and so on, there have been a number of questions that have come up. I think we've probably got a couple of minutes to ask one or two of those of your good selves, but I am aware that a number of people will have, need to get off the call in a few minutes. So what I am undertaking to do is to sort of take those questions and put them onto the Padlet, and if you feel able to answer them there, or I can have a go, or other people can from the call can have a go at answering some of those questions on there. This, as I said right at the start, this is part of a start of some work that we're doing in terms of developing networks around biodiversity. And I think actually we've done that this evening, because there are a number of people who are now aware of a number of organizations, whether that's NGOs, social enterprises, training organizations, community groups and so on, who are involved in doing this sort of work, and hopefully will have drawn from the work that you as contributors have put in front of people this evening. I would ask people who are on the call to sort of do engage with the Padlet, and there are a couple of questions on there that have come from us as the London RCE in terms of trying to get people who are on the call to feed through things that they are aware of, or they are organisations that they are aware of, that we might highlight in future discussions, and also the possibility of getting some RCE recognition for projects that people are are engaged in. And sort of it occurred to me that both the work that all three of you are doing, has got elements that might be appropriate for recognition by the wider networks. One of the questions which did come up, which I think is quite an important one, is there are proposals, are there not, from DEFRA coming about planning and potentially removing the need for net biodiversity gain in any planning that's going forward, is my understanding. And sort of one of the people on the call asked the question, do you have any particular views on that?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand the question. What's my feeling about?
Well, my understanding is that there are some proposals about planning, changes to the planning regulations, where sort of there might not necessarily be the need to build in some biodiversity net gain into planning. Is my understanding. Is my understanding wrong?
It might not be. That's not something that I was aware of. I was aware more that we were moving towards having a biodiversity net gain target, which is something that we've not really had. From the many years that I worked on developments, you can make recommendations to improve a site, but it wasn't a prerequisite necessarily unless it involved a protected species.
Okay.
I think I'll just add something quite vague to that, Neil.
Yeah.
Where we're at in terms of time now with Brexit and with COVID, and there's so much going on, it is a really easy time for legislation to get pushed through quite quickly. So my advice to people, and this goes beyond biodiversity, is just to pay attention to things that are proposed and put forward, and to comment based on your experience and skills, etc. So I'm not aware of the specific aspect that was raised, but yeah, it's just, I think it's important. Now is the time for us to be vigilant about any things that are put forward.
It looks like people are putting stuff in the chat about a consultation, so maybe there is a consultation going on around biodiversity net gain. And as a metric, I think it has some value. As an ecologist, I don't think it captures everything. As is the case with these things.
That's beautiful. It's sort of it seems to have worked, because we have links in the chat, and I know the chat will disappear in a bit, but we will I will collate that and send it out to all participants and pop it onto the Padlet so that people can have a look at these things. I am very aware of a time, and we are over, but I will just ask one more question, which sort of brings everybody together, I think. Okay, and that is, Paula, you talked about doing that work with the community group and running a brief ecology course, and Kieran, you've got lots of courses which are related to ecology. And there are platforms out there like iRecord and iNaturalist and Bird Track and lots of things like that. you know, how do we bring those things together so that, you know, people aren't reinventing wheels, or if they are reinventing wheels, it's sort of, at least you've got the spokes to put in the wheel. Because a number of people have said, you know, it's sort of, how do you inspire people who aren't already, for want of a better term, interested? And it's sort of getting the enthusiasm for people to engage. You know, if we've got some tools there that we can draw on, maybe the energy can go into the inspiration rather than the development of the tools, if that makes any sort of sense.
I did notice that there was something in the chat as well from someone asking about how you reach sort of the hard to reach people and minorities, etc. And I think you know, the ecology course, you know, you wouldn't recognize it as an ecology course, I'm sure, Kieran. It was incredibly basic, just, you know, and that was with a lot of, you know, hard to reach people who are not computer literate, who don't engage with these things. But it was just to get them out into their neighborhoods to notice that there was nature there. So, you know, you don't need to watch a David Attenborough program to experience nature. You can go outside and experience nature. And, you know, I think we were really, and Caroline can probably add to this as well, we were really just trying to spark some interest and, I guess, love for where they live, because
where they are.
Yeah, the more people engage and love where they are, the more they're going to resist, you know, damage. It's
always been my view that sort of, you know, you need to start from where you are, because that's how you engage. That's how you engage people. And I suppose what I'm in terms of the example of the ecology course is, you know, how do you take the framework that you set up and say to somebody who's 20 miles across the city or the other side of the world, actually this approach seems to work, try it in your context. Kieran, I'm sorry, I think I spoke across you then.
Yeah, so I was just going to add something to what Paul has said. These audiences, we refer to them as hard to reach for a reason. They're hard to reach, and that can be for any number of reasons. Different ethnicity, different cultural things, different socio-economic situations, etc. I think something that's really important is that we show a bit of humility and realize that they're hard to reach for a reason. We might not know the reasons why they don't engage with us or how to engage them. So I think it's really important to, as somebody organizing a training program, to engage with partners that are already engaged in that community. So, for example, there's the Black Environment Network that you can engage with if you're looking to get into get your stuff out to Black and ethnic minority audiences. There are plenty of organizations out there that specialize in younger audiences or older audiences, etc. So I think that's a really, if you're organizing a project or a training program, etc., I think it's always important to consider what partners you should work alongside. And to come to your comment about there's so many different tools out there, you're right. And we can look at this two ways. We can either say, look, this is intimidating, or we can look at it as an opportunity. The more tools that are out there, the more things that we have to engage with people. And behind the scenes, some of it is quite joined up. Somebody asked in the chat about iNaturalist and iRecord, but actually the data from iNaturalist goes into iRecord. So sometimes these things that might look a bit disparate are a bit more joined up, and the local environmental record centres and the national recording schemes can get their data. They can get the data from iRecord if they want to. So it's not always as disparate as it may seem. And again, I think it's about communicating with potential partners and users of data or users of services, etc. Yeah.
Well, that's very helpful, and I think that's one of the ideas behind getting some networking and highlighting some of these things through a network which, you know, isn't a biodiversity. The London RCE isn't a biodiversity network. It's a network about education for sustainable development, and people come from it from all sorts of different areas. You know, as more social scientists probably than sort of natural scientists, and it's about bringing those things together, I think, and which is where we started from in terms of the network. Caroline, I think you had your hand up there.
I was just going to say, I think that was one of the things with the course that we did, which we called an ecology course, but there was an artist, there was a social scientist, and there was an ecologist, and we just all brought our different perceptions into the course, and I think that was probably part of the reason that it worked, and that it was local. You know, we took people to their local spaces and showed them what was there, which is very valuable.
I think, Caroline, I will bring it to a close there, because I think you've just wrapped up what this seminar series is about. I mean, it is an RCE event, which is sort of a global event, but it is the London RCE, so it's sort of the global and the local, and it's within the seminar series we've done. Seems like it sounds like we've finished it, but we haven't. You know, sort of the way art is used to engage, the way that storytelling is used to engage, things which were picked up by Paula in terms of the work that she's done in Sarajevo and Nicosia and so on, and you know, that engagement with biodiversity, which is sort of crying out for help, and I'm heartened that there are people like yourselves who are doing this work. I'm sort of almost sorry that the work has to be done, because it would be nice if we lived in a world where you know, it ticked along like it should, but we know we don't. So we need to keep going. We need to keep making the changes that you people are doing. We need to inspire people who don't necessarily carry the same enthusiasm to start with, but everybody lives somewhere, and you know, everybody has an environment. They aren't divorced from that, they are of it, and those are the sorts of things that, you know, the messages that we need to get out. At that point, and when I realized that I'm beginning to ramble, lots of people say you started rambling, Herrington, right at the start, but sort of let's thank you all very much. Kieran, Paula, Caroline, thanks to you all for putting the time in to tell us all about the work that you're doing. I will get the questions and the comments around to people in some shape or form. There is the Twitter handle as well, the Twitter hashtag that people can use to carry on some of those conversations. Thanks very much to you for live tweeting the event. Thank you very much for everybody for joining the call, and at that point we shall say good night. Bye bye all.
Bye. Thanks everyone for coming.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Hi everyone.